Thank you so much to the Nebraska Zen Center for putting this all together. All of your chanting voices sounded beautiful. I really appreciated the chanting over there. I and I appreciate our online presence this morning as well. I see a lot of folks from our group at Zen Fields, as well as from Nebraska Zen Center. So it's really nice to see everybody together here. I tried to put the sutra book online. I hope or in the chat. I hope people got to see that if you weren't clear on where what we were chanting there, and I hope you could find your place. I'll start doing that in the future for these online discussions. Today, this weekend is we are on the verge of celebrating 4th of July. So I want to make some comments that maybe connect with 4th of July today. I had initially in the newsletter, if you've read the newsletter, you may have seen that I was planning to talk about something else. But I think in light of this holiday, it's important to connect our practice with it in some way. So I'll make some opening comments about and this will be my patriotic self speaking. One of the things that my teacher would repeat to us is in Zen, well, I should say, the way of the world is fly now, pay later. The way of Zen is pay now, fly later. In other words, we in our culture, we want immediate gratification. We want things immediately, even if we don't have the resources to pay for it. We want to do that thing. We want to get that thing. But with Zen practice, we don't get off of the hook for having to pay a certain price. Freedom, in a sense. And I think our ancestors, our American ancestors, the ones that helped to found this country, and I don't mean just the founding forefathers, they're as important as they were. It was a movement from an entire region that brought what we call freedom. And no doubt all of those people, I mean, if we could transport ourselves back, 150 years now, we would see, we would have seen, let's see, 1776, was that it? You have to, yep. So it's been 250 years, not 150 years. There's my 250 years. I've corrected myself. Thank you. If we could transport ourselves back to that time, what would it have been like in this country, in the places that we are presently abiding in, or maybe especially on the East Coast? What would life have been like at that time amongst the colonists? Never mind the indigenous peoples and the relations with them, just amongst the colonists. And there's this relationship with the English government where there is a certain degree of oppression and unfairness, and the whole society made a movement, not just these certain men in our history, but the whole society got behind this movement. And you could bet there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and the lives sacrificed in that process. I've recently been re-inspired by our founding history in watching and listening to the soundtrack of the musical Hamilton. Very inspiring. If you haven't watched it, I was surprised. At first, I was a little bit sketchy about it, but then when I started listening to it and watching the acting, it's on. You can get it on Disney, or maybe you can buy it. But it's very inspiring to me to think about what all was going on then. How does this connect us to Zen? How does this connect us to Zen practice? There may be, for some of us, this idea, and actually probably for all of us, certainly for me, that we can just sit on the cushion and things are like magically going to happen. That's the fly now, pay later way of thinking. But like our ancestors, our American ancestors, they had to put a lot of effort into gaining freedom and independence. And in the same way, in Zen practice, there has to be effort put in. And I don't just mean on the seated cushion. I mean, that's where we tend to focus. And that's where we tend to identify as Zen practice as this, like putting our bodies on a cushion. And that's an important piece. But that piece is totally connected to another piece, and that is our daily life. So for example, when we wake up in the morning, we fix our beds, right? That's without thinking too much about it. That's Zen practice too. When you come to if you're training in a Zen temple as a monastic, you're working really hard. You're sweating a lot, especially if it's summer, because there ain't no air conditioning, and at least in Japanese Zen temples, and some temples here in the United States, if you go to Tassajara, for example, in California, they don't have any AC, and you're out and exposed to the elements. And what are you doing most of the time? It's not sitting in the Zendo. I mean, there may be times when you're sitting, and that's well and good. There's a lot of effort dedicated to work practice. Work practice means cleaning, right? And you don't have to be in a Zen temple to know the importance of cleaning. But tell you what, if you come to the Zen center, then you can be inspired by what goes on there. A lot of cleaning. I mean, just look in the backyard of Nebraska Zen Center, and at least when I was there a couple of weeks ago, how beautiful those grounds are. That doesn't come by just sitting. It comes by pulling weeds, by mulching, by laying down tarps, etc. And all of these things, breaking leaves, all of that goes in, sweeping the ground, sweeping the insides, cleaning the bathrooms. Right? You guys we have a work day at Nebraska Zen Center coming up, and I would encourage you, if you're present in Omaha, to go there and clean. Right? This is whatever you do to the outside world, whether it's washing a dish or raking the leaves, you're doing to the inside world. You're doing right here. And then you sit, right? Then Zazen makes sense. But if we don't do those things first, Zazen doesn't make much sense. You know, if our life is a total mess, it's chaotic, and we don't even know how to clean, then our Zazen is not going to, our Zazen is going to reflect that. We're going to be confused when we sit. So think about this. This is not to like lay judgment on people. It's just to get ourselves oriented to practice, right? What is practice? And a big part of it, and I say this because I'm not the best cleaner. I just got scolded from my partner this morning. I got to remember, yeah, I got to clean this room up. I got to get this ready, right? We have to, you know, a good place to begin practice is as soon as you wake up in the morning, fix your bed. That's practice, right? You work, clean one room a day, even if it's for 10 minutes or even 5 minutes. Take out a broom and sweep it, and then sit, right? And if you need inspiration, go to the Zen Center and go there, right? And see what happens to keep that going. We're going to be having sesshin in a couple of weeks. Tremendous effort that goes into preparing for a sesshin. Not just the cleaning, but a lot of effort goes into the cooking of meals, preparing meals, that kind of thing. It's a wonderful, and to me, this is the heart of practice. I spent a lot of time cleaning the floors, right? Just getting down on my knees with a rag and cleaning the floors. Now you don't have to do it with a rag. Nowadays I do it with a stick, right? Got those mops that work really well, those squeegee mops. And, you know, look at your own place around you. Look at your own space around you. How clean is it? Is it orderly? I'm looking at my desk right now, and I know it can be cleaner. I know it can be more organized. And I'm only saying this as an example of how we can grow in our practice. We all have ways that we can grow. I watched my teacher suffer with this too, because she was at times very unorganized, very disorganized. And she would say to me, you know, Daishin, all of the mess of the Zendo has to come somewhere. It doesn't disappear, so it goes into my room. That was her. That was her way of talking about it. Like she would just be like, you know, in the Zen temples in Japan, it was always spotless, and that was the way she trained, and that's the way she taught me. But when I would go visit her in her room, and she'd be working behind her desk, and there was like piles of paper and completely disorganized, and she would say, well, the mess has got to go somewhere. I'll take it. But you know, when I went to practice with Nonan, I was very actually delightfully surprised, because his room was not a mess at all. His was very orderly, at least when I was practicing with him. He had his brushes, all of his calligraphy brushes, very well organized. His desk was always clear, and you know, it was a reflection of his mind. So this is our practice, right? And this is the means to freedom. Is it just cleaning? No, it's everything. It's everything is practice in our life. And our Zazen is a reflection of that. At the end of the sutra we just chanted, we talked about the ancestors. There was a line in there. Let me see where it said something about the ancestors. Let me pull that up. The last line there. One of the last lines here. Oh no, it wasn't the sutra, it was the echo. It was the echo that was read. We said I don't know what the echo read exactly, but it was something about the ancestral teachers.
May we constantly live in the light of the ancestral teaching.
May we constantly live in the light of the ancestral teachings. So I want to connect this back to, first of all, this celebration that we're doing on Tuesday, the 4th of July. We are connecting back, in a sense, to our American ancestors. There's something very human about connecting back to our ancestors that we celebrate. And the 4th of July is an example of what humans do. It's not an American thing to celebrate something that our ancestors did. And for America, it happens to connect deeply. The 4th of July happens to connect deeply to what our ancestors have done. And so, and we don't even think about that. We just take it for granted. Yeah, this is what happened. And it's because these people who lived at this time did this thing that we are the way that we are today. It's a memorial, in a sense. It's a memorial of our forefathers and all of the whole society at that time. And Zen makes that it holds the ancestors up, the Zen ancestors. It holds all of these Zen ancestors up, and it points to them as, this is why Zen is the way it is today. So in a way, there's a parallel here I'm trying to draw. Now, I want to go back in my own personal history just for a moment, and share my slides. So I want to ask the question here: who are my ancestors? Who are my ancestors? Now, certainly, my ancestors are. I would think of them immediately. What comes to my mind is my family, my blood family. And in celebrating the 4th of July, we are remembering our American ancestors, what it means to be American specifically. And in a sense, we are remembering these ancestors. These are also our ancestors. Zen takes that a little bit further and says there are Zen ancestors. These are people that we want to acknowledge as having brought forth some truth, some dharma. So I want to look at take a look at our ancestral lineage. I remember, and for 4th of July, we connect these ancestors to to freedom. When I remember when I was in college and I had been studying religion for a while. I'd been sitting too. I'd done some sitting practice and a lot of studying, mainly intellectual, but still, nonetheless, it took effort to do this. And I remember distinctly, I was a senior and I was coming to graduate. It was just a few weeks before graduation, and I was reading this book that one of my professors gave me about the universe. And I happened to be sitting at a bench close to a small wooded area. And while I was reading this book, I made the connection with something like a really deep feeling that everything, absolutely everything is connected, right? That these trees over here, these trees that I'm sitting next to have been around. Their molecules, their atoms have been around since the beginning of time. Whenever that was, the birth, there is an intimacy between ourselves and the entire universe. And in some way, I am deeply connected to all of us, not just me. And yet, I think our issue is that we don't make that connection, generally speaking. We don't make that connection regularly. Zen practice is about making that connection with our ancestral teachers, not just people. However, we tend to let me get away here. We have this tendency to forget, right? We have this tendency to forget our relatedness. And so Zen practice ideally brings us back to that. And there's many stories within Zen that help us to realize our true nature, which is that we are related to everything. And one of the things that that inspired me was when I first started practicing with my teacher. There's this wonderful thing in Zen called the four vows, the four bodhisattva vows. And the first one is, beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. And as a biology student and a student of religion at university, I was studying mass extinction, starting with the dinosaurs up to the present mass extinction. And I thought, wow, here's a religious paradigm or a religious orientation that helps to get our minds wrapped around our present living circumstances, that we're living in the midst of a sixth mass extinction. And here's a way of thinking that can help us to orient our lives. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them all or to save them all. Now, we can go into that a lot more deeply. I'm not going to go into it too much right now, but just to say that it was an initial, for me anyways, initial inspiration for wanting to study more deeply Zen, right? One of the ways that we do this in ceremony, like I mentioned at the end of the ceremony that we just did today, we make this dedication to all of these ancestors in our lineage. And this is tied to liberation, it's tied to our own freedom. If you chant, as we've done at Nebraska Zen Center, and sometimes we do this at Zen Fields, but not so frequently, we chant the ancestors from the Buddha, actually what's called the 7 Buddhas before Buddha, up until our present teacher. So the Buddha, all the Zen ancestors in India, and then as Zen moves to China, all of the ancestors in China, and then in Japan, all the ancestors in Japan, and then all of the ancestors, it's more recently in the United States, also other parts of the world as well. But we have this ceremony where we're chanting we're chanting, we're acknowledging all of these great ancestors. And one of the reasons for doing this is that, for one thing, if we really do see them as our ancestors, just as when I was sitting at the base of that small wooded area on my college campus, if we really recognize that these are our ancestors, we feel a sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves. This is, I think, the main purpose for recognizing our ancestors. And that includes the 4th of July as well, right? When we recognize, it's not just about the fireworks. The fireworks, when we see those fireworks going off, it's a remembrance of those that have died for us at that particular time. There's also, within the Zen lineage, there's a desire to hold up certain values, right? When we recite the names of these ancestors, we're holding up certain values, and they offer us some inspiration to attain enlightenment. All right, now I want to shift a little bit here. Where I'm going with this. I deeply admire, I deeply love chanting all of the Buddha ancestors' names. I think it's important that we have a process to remember our ancestors, whether it's 4th of July or whether it's chanting Buddha's names. But I see two problems with our way of looking at our ancestors. The first problem that we have, or maybe I shouldn't say they're problems, maybe I should say that we ought to reflect on them as ways that we can improve, Just like I mentioned, cleaning our room or fixing our bed, right? These are ways that we can improve our lives and improve our zazen. And there's also ways that we can, I think, improve the way that we understand our ceremonies too. So if we're chanting the names of the Buddha, I think there's two ways that we can improve. There's two issues. One is something called anthropocentrism. And the second one is patriarchy. So I want to tackle the first one, actually the second one first, because that's the easier one to tackle, that one about patriarchy. If you notice in our ancestral lineage, all of the names of the ancestors are male, every single one of them. In my lineage, the only one who isn't is my teacher. She's the only female in that lineage that I'm aware of. All the others, to my knowledge, are men. Now, one of the ways that Zen in the United States has started to address that is to chant, and I know you guys do this, we do this at Nebraska Zen Center, is to chant the names of certain female ancestors, Zen ancestors, that have been notable in some way, but haven't gotten a lot of recognition. So if you wonder, what is patriarchy? It's basically centering maleness, and women in general are relegated to the periphery of spiritual practice when it comes to religion. And we see that in many ways. For millennia, women have not, it's only more recently that we see women as taking on roles such as priests within Christianity. And actually in Soto Zen, to our credit, they recently, Oyama Roshi, one of my teachers, female teachers, Oyama Roshi, she was the head of the women's monastery for decades. And she was recently installed as the assistant, I believe she's the assistant abbess of Sojiji, which is the one of two head training temples of Soto Zen in Japan. So there's some shifting taking place. And even my teacher, she was asked to be what we call the Sokan, or the bishop of all of the North American priests. She declined it at that time, but they've been making some movements in that direction to center female leadership. And actually Galen Godwin, Honjin Godwin, is presently in that position. So there's movement in that direction, I think. but still, the ancestral lineage is male dominated, and we want to recognize the importance of centering female voices as part of our spiritual practice. So this is one thing we want to continue in that way. I think in Soto Zen, I think we're making a lot of headway, and we want to continue it. At present, within the SCBA, for example, there is probably, I want to say there's about an equal number of male and female priests there. Now, the other thing that's a little bit more challenging, I think, to look at is what we call anthropocentrism. So anthro has to do with human, like anthropology, the study of humans, anthropology. Anthropocentric means that we tend to center our lives around what's important for human beings, which makes total logical sense. However, because humans have become such a predominant power in the world today, that in fact we are shaping the destiny of our planet, we need to start rethinking our anthropocentrism, our anthropocentric tendencies. And the reciting of the ancestral names, for example, in the Soto Zen, it's all human ancestors. They're all human ancestors, which makes sense. It makes sense. But there's a lot of in Soto Zen that says even the stars are ancestors, that we're related to everything, not just human beings. Yet when it comes to ceremony, we don't actually see beyond our human ancestors there. So it's just bringing out a point in which our practice may be needing some improvement or some further awareness or some further development. I'm not in a place right now to think about how that might look or happen at present, but I just want to put it out there as a way of critiquing our own tradition. I think this is important to do, especially if you've been in it for a while, that we need to develop self-criticism. And that means part of practice is the ability to critique ourselves, our own practice. That requires some strength and confidence in ourselves. So we can look at our life and say, you know what, when I wake up in the morning, I don't fix my bed. I'm going to start fixing my bed. Or, you know, when I finish eating a meal, I don't bother washing the dishes or helping out washing the dishes. I let somebody else do it. I'm going to start helping out. This is a self-critique. We can start looking at our own life and start thinking about ways that we can improve. Just as our American ancestors said, you know what, we don't like the way that Britain is running these colonies, and it really should be self-rule. We're going to make some efforts to change that. And it cost them many, many lives to do that, right? So when I'm mentioning fixing our bed, washing dishes, it might not seem like a big deal, but you might get resistance from those that are around you from making little changes like that. Cleaning a room, maybe your roommate is a slob. No offense or anything, but maybe they start to feel self-conscious if you start cleaning. You know, you start cleaning up your own act, and then other people start getting self-conscious about it, and then they don't want to. You know, you shine so much light. They're so afraid of themselves, of seeing themselves in their own dirt, and they don't have a way to deal with it. And then you get kicked out, or something happens, right? And this is, you know, when you want to change things, you've got to be willing to pay a price. If you want to change something, you've got to be willing to pay a price. But Zen says, pay now, fly later. Pay now, fly. If you want something to change, you've got to pay the price now. All right. So let's think about ways that we can do that for our own lives. And also, once we feel some settledness within, if we feel, you know, it's not for everybody to critique Soto Zen. If you're feeling an affinity with the practice, then I would encourage you to ask questions about it. Like, why do we do it like this? Why do we do it like that? Why don't we do this? I would encourage questioning our practice, questioning me as a teacher, right? Questioning, this is part of what practice is. We work together, teacher student works together to clarify practice, to inspire. We work with a Sangha, with a community to clarify what we're doing, right? And that we make sure we're well grounded in our practice, as well as doing things that actually are serving other beings in a way that allows us to break these habits. That's one of the things Faith and Mind we just read says something about, I can't remember where it was, but we break old habits. That's what our practice is about, breaking these old habits that no longer serve us. Beings are numberless. I'm about to free them. My ancestors are not simply human ancestors. We've got to remember all the ancestors, all of them, the animals, the plants, the rocks, the mountains. These are the stars up in the heavens, the galaxies, the billions now that we know, these billions of galaxies swirling around us are also just as much of our ancestors. Thank you.
And we have time for questions and comments if anyone has any discussion.
Hi, Daishan. Thank you for that.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi. And just listening to your talk, I guess like two things came up for me. And one was like when, I don't know, I feel like, well, one, in our American culture, we don't have this emphasis like built into our culture for like acknowledging and formally acknowledging ancestors. You know, like 4th of July might be one of the rare times. And I notice a tendency in maybe just the act in and of itself, like when we do that, especially when we're talking about like forefathers, they almost, yeah, they were historical figures, like actual people who lived, but then they're also just kind of mythologized, right? And so sometimes we can fail to remember also when we're honoring them that they were just guys, like humans, imperfect humans, you know, who, I don't know, sometimes like, and I imagine a lot of people in this country, I have conflicted feelings about, you know, my patriotism. And I always, every 4th of July, I try to hold at the same time, like, yeah, they made some mistakes. And also at the exact same time, they made some really, you know, they did some really great things, like both are true. And in acknowledging that, you're also acknowledging what you've inherited, you know, like, yes, this country as it is, and it's so messy, but it's also good. It's like all of it together. And so to me, I don't know, like 4th of July is always kind of interesting in that way.
Like karma.
Yeah, exactly. And then also like just talking about ancestors, sometimes I think about like how many humans have lived like before us. I mean, there's gotta be like a roundabout number, like in the billions, maybe
14 billion.
14 billion, thank you so much. And so like when I think about that, like it's also really grounding because it's like 14 billion humans have come before us and we're all here right now. Like this is our time right now. And so I don't know, I don't think about ancestors much in that way, but when I do, that's usually, for me, there's this kind of sense of like awe a little bit and groundedness, like, oh, it's our turn, like right now, like what are we gonna do with it? And so anyway, that's all. And thank you again, that was a really good talk.
Thank you, thanks Sarah. Thanks for bringing in your thoughts on this. Yeah, certainly a mixed bag.
Hi, I'm Brianna.
Hi, Brianna.
I wanted to comment on the practice of cleaning for practicing Zen. You know, I never really thought about that, and I think I'm really going to start incorporating that into my daily, like, you know, getting up, making my bed, you know, taking 10 minutes just to clean something before I start my meditation. I think that'll really help me. So thank you.
Awesome. 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 So happy you shared that. Yeah. 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 We all get kind of, we can drift away from that real easy, I think.
Where those Gothas come back in.
That's right. Yeah. Those Gathas. That's right.
It's amazing how, cleaning a room that needs cleaning can clean out your head.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah. Folks online, please, Max, go ahead.
Yes. I know you were a little hesitant to take on the issue of anthropocentrism and seeing what a new relationship to that would look like. But I did want to poke at that a little bit more. There are elements of Zen practice, like when over lunch at Sesshin, we offer rice to the hungry ghosts. That tends to be brought in that way, but also a lot of the connection with land spirits and other beings in Japan seems to be tied more to that Shinto tradition and doesn't get brought in as much with Zen practice. Meanwhile, also connecting to the fourth coming up, a lot of American culture due to colonization is also tied to cutting off particular relationships to the land. Like here in the Great Plains of the near mass extinction of the bison and all the cultural traditions that came along with that. So when we're thinking of building a relationship to the beings around us, not centering the humans so much, there's on the one hand not wanting to appropriate other traditions, whether it's Shinto in Japan and bringing it over here, or trying to reconstruct the Native American traditions that we've cut off. But on the other hand, I don't know, it's hard to know where to even really start with building that relationship in an authentic manner. Are there things like that, offering of rice to the hungry ghosts that you can think of as good jumping off points within Zen that we've already established, things like that we can explore a little bit more? Or do you have
Right. I do. I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, I think actually just having this conversation is an important first start. It's a piece to get people, because people might be all over the map as far as what we're talking about. So we need to have the conversation in order to clarify what is the problem. Anthropocentrism is so concretized part of our mentality that we might not even recognize it. It's like the fish doesn't recognize the water it's swimming in. And I think oftentimes we don't even recognize. So starting the conversation is a beginning. And actually prior to the Meiji Restoration in Japan, there was loads of intermixing between Shinto and Buddhism in Japan. We talk about cultural appropriation, and I think it is important to be careful of it. Yet, cultural appropriation is taking place a lot. I don't know if we could call it appropriation all the time. Sharing of culture, sharing of practices has been going on for thousands of years. It's a matter of tracing back where things come from. That can be a helpful antidote to saying, "Oh, we're coming up with this new thing." But for example, in Japan, prior to the Meiji Restoration, Buddhism and Shinto were totally tied together. Buddhist priests would take up residence at a Shinto shrine, and they would be the Shinto gods would become bodhisattvas. And in Buddhist temples, certain, like at my teacher's temple, there's a little cave down the mountain a little ways where they've set up a little shrine, and you chant the Heart Sutra there. So, it's not uncommon to see the Heart Sutra chanted, a Buddhist text chanted at a Shinto shrine. That's not an uncommon thing. And the Japanese don't necessarily make this clear distinction between Shinto and Buddhism. And they won't necessarily call themselves religious, as far as my own kind of working with them. They don't necessarily call themselves religious. They might say, I don't have a religion, but yet they go to the shrine on certain festivals, they'll go to the temple for memorial services, etc. And so there's not this clear separation there between the two. And as a result, Shinto and Buddhism have been really intertwined. So and even my teacher's teacher said to us when he came to the United States, and I think it was 2006 or so, somewhere around there, 2008 maybe. He came to the United States and he gave a series of talks, and we went on a walk with him. Me and my teacher, we went on a walk with him around the surrounding area, and we were asking, like, how do we get more kind of grounded, rooted in this here space that we have? And he said, well, you got to recognize the spirits in the local place. This is coming from a Buddhist teacher. You got to recognize the spirits in the local place. And I'll just tell you a short story here. I don't want to make it too much longer, but Mount Equity Zendo, where I trained, there was lots of mountains close by. At the foot of the mountains were the corn and soy fields, kind of like Iowa minus the mountains. And so he asked about this great mountain range that was before us, called Bald Eagle Mountain Range, and it was a part of the Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Trail actually was not too far. One entrance point was not too far from the Zendo. And my teacher said to him, well, it was named not after the bald eagle, the bird, but after one of the leaders of the Munsee indigenous peoples that live there. The Munsee is one of three clans connected to what we know today as the Delaware Nation. So this was a leader within that particular clan. And so my teacher's teacher continued to question. He said, now, why is that whole mountain range named after him? And the motel in town in Munsee, that was the town that it was in, called Munsee after the indigenous tribe. Why is this hotel named after Captain Brady in the military? He was a military leader for the American government. So my teacher's teacher put two and two together. He said, Bald Eagle must have been a really, really great leader if they named the mountain range after him, and compared to Captain Brady, who got the hotel named after him. Right? You just like, so when we look at what we name things, people place importance on what we name. Think about naming a child. We place importance on what we name, and it has historical significance. We don't know all the history there, but the mountain range was named after Bald Eagle, and the hotel was named after the captain. Right. So as a consequence of that, we started thinking about the earth spirit of this place. And we even got a little bald eagle image, like a little statue of a bald eagle, and placed that on our altar from that point forward, to recognize that the land itself also contains energy, in a sense that our land contains energy. So whether it's Iowa, whether it's Omaha, our land contains the past. This is right. We can't. America starts in 1776 with that Independence Day, but it really doesn't start there. That's just a marker. We can't ignore the deeper past of the indigenous peoples that were here well before us, and our relationship with them as well. And so, anyways, this is just starting a conversation. I don't have answers for this, and there's a lot of pain involved. It's a messy thing to look at, but I think it's worth starting a conversation and kind of teasing some of these things out, because there's a lot of murkiness around it.
Daishin, this is Pam.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there's a lot of this in Zen. I'm just thinking of self-fulfilling samadhi, a lot of Dogen's writing, the trees, walls, fences, rocks, grasses, all glow with the Buddha light.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So these are, again, this is where Zen, these are some of the strong points of Zen. But when it comes to rituals like the ancestral lineage, this is something that had a particular place in a particular time. It was actually, if you look back, this is something particular to Chinese and Japanese, I think maybe Korean Zen as well. Because if you go into Southeast Asia, Asian Buddhist countries, they don't celebrate a ancestral lineage the way that we do today. So that has its own history behind it that's connected to that particular region at a particular time. And we're doing it today in our culture and time that's far removed from where it started. So it's just, again, I'm just raising questions about this. I don't have a particular answer for how to go with it or what to do with it. But you're right, Pam. Zen has is replete with making connections with the natural world, and I think we need to draw on that more and more.
Anyone else? Comments, questions?
Well, I'm Summer. And a Buddhist concept that I find very dear, and I work on this all the time, dependent origination. Where we cause, that everything exists because of causes, and you remove it and it goes away. And yeah, it's as deep as anything. I never hear enough about it though.
Yeah, that's a great Buddhist concept to keep in mind, dependent origination. Yeah. Everything rises up together. There's not one origin. Yeah. Well, I know we've gone over our time here. I don't want to keep people either, so maybe we can wrap it up here. And I would invite other people to share. If you have comments or questions, feel free to you could email me, or those of you who are with our Zen Fields forum can have a conversation there, or if folks on the Nebraska Zen Center want to share more, please do. I hope you can have more conversation about this there as well. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have the closing chant, call and response. The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across. The many beings are numberless, bowing to carry them across. Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, bowing to cut off the mind road. Greed, anger, and ignorance rise endlessly, bowing to cut off the mind road. Dharma gates are countless, bowing to wake them all. Dharma gates are countless, bowing to wake them all. Buddha's way is all embracing, bowing to follow through. Buddha's way is all embracing, bowing to follow through. Let's just do a couple of announcements. Thank you, Daishin, for reminding us about Work Day. That's Saturday, July the 15th. So that'd be 9 to 1, I think, and refreshments provided. Also, later in the month, Daishin will be back here, and we'll be having a 3-day sesshin, or 2.5, however you want to count it, from Friday midday through Sunday midday. That's the 21st through
that have orioke or,
Mhm.
okay.
And actually, for you, Summer, we're looking forward to a week-long practice period in August with a guest priest here, Koji Apoviva, who is actually going to spend half a day in Dharma study on dependent origination. So, yeah, that's something. to look forward
It's
to.
big, it's a big.
That's what I think he calls it, the whole deal.
Yeah, it's.
It
big.
is, yeah, his study is called The Whole Deal. So, that to look forward to. Anything else, Tara, I forget?
You gonna do Thursdays in the garden? Is that this Thursday?
Yeah, next Thursday,
So that's 5 to 7.
5 to 7.
So just keep the garden beautiful, as Daishan had pointed out. Takes work.
Okay, thank you all. We'll put our cushions back in